Ohio State has had a history of great college quarterbacks, whether it's Troy Smith, Terrell Pryor, you go to the Urban Meyer era, it's the Braxton Miller era, the J.T. Barrett era, Dwayne Haskins one season where he just tore up the Big Ten through the air. Ohio State is at a system with college QBs where they have one great college QB, and then he leaves and his successor has already been groomed and prepared for just long enough to be very successful once the starting position opens up for him. They don't have the most lucrative history of getting superstar or developing superstar NFL QBs, though Ryan Day, just from what I've seen, is certainly trying to change that, and he may have already changed it. But Ohio State, at the very minimum, has had a history of very good college quarterbacks, giving them some experience before they're just fully launched into the starting position. And if they are launched into the starting position, well, they have the talent, the athleticism, and the coaching to back it up. CJ Stroud, though, last year, entering 2021, it was the first time in a long time that an Ohio State QB was going to start without throwing a collegiate pass before. Long time. I don't know the exact amount of years, but it was a while ago. So if you can tell me the amount of years it's been since that happened, let me know in the comments below. But Stroud not only entered the season without throwing a collegiate pass in college football before, he entered the season and for close to a whole month struggled. Did not show signs that he was playing at his predecessor in Justin Fields' level. He didn't run the ball a whole lot. Yeah, he could scramble, get out of the pocket if necessary, but he did not show Justin Fields the same dual threat capability against Minnesota, Tulsa, and Oregon. The 3 games he played in September, he threw a pick, and the one game that he crossed the 200 passer rating in, he didn't even complete 60% of his passes. That was at Minnesota. Against Tulsa, that was probably his worst game. He went 15 of 25, 185 yards, completed 60% of his passes, threw a TD, a pick, got sacked twice, and had his worst passer rating of the year. After that game, he was dealing with a little bit of a nagging injury, but I think some of it was just mental pressure too. Ryan Day decided to sit him out for 1 game, and you know how the rest of the year ends. He comes back against Rutgers, throws for 5 touchdowns, 330 yards, completes 74% of his passes, has a near-perfect QB rating. Go against Maryland, Indiana, it's the same story. He struggles a little bit against Penn State and Nebraska in back-to-back weeks, but those defenses were known to be some of the Big Ten's better defenses, especially in the pass defense department. I'm mainly referencing Nebraska there, who struggled against the run at times, was pretty efficient at defending the pass, though. Penn State was just an efficient overall defense, but excluding those 2 games, he did well then against Purdue, where he had an over 200 passer rating. We all know how the Michigan State game went around, and even though the Michigan game, which Ohio State fans, don't want to hear about, even though that game happened, Stroud still threw for 400 yards, 2 touchdowns, completed 70% of his passes, had a 150 passer rating, and he had an 82 QB rating, which was higher than the game against Oregon, higher than the game against Tulsa, and higher than the game against Nebraska. And Michigan's defense was probably, outside of maybe Penn State's, the best defense that Ohio State had faced all year. An away game, and he still did excellently. And then in the bowl game against Utah, we also know what happened. Tore up Utah for nearly 600 passing yards, 6 TDs, only 1 bad interception, had a near-perfect QB rating, and had a 223.8 passer rating. The guy's a beast. The guy started off the year slow. He didn't even play the full 13 games for Ohio State as Kyle McCord started the game against Akron, and he still just padded stat after stat after stat after stat. I'm here to mainly tell you guys why I think that this guy is QB1 nationally. why this guy will be QB1 entering the NFL draft, and why I think that CJ Stroud will, frankly, win the Heisman Trophy and possibly break, hinting to something that we'll look at later, possibly break a passing statistic record with just where Ohio State's offense is going, the talent at wide receiver, how Ohio State later in the year, even though they did play, MSU and Utah's secondary in the same time frame that they played their November games and bowl game, they were starting to pass more already as they faced tougher opponents. And with their schedule this season, which notes some possibly tougher opponents than some of the games last year, we might see Ohio State pass even more. I think Ryan Day wants to command a more pass-heavy offense. Of course, having that strong run game, you have to have a strong run game along with a strong pass game to have that elite offense. But he wants, I can say for near certainty, he wants that pass-heavy offense. And he should, with Brian Hartline, the wide receivers that he coaches, and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marvin Harrison, with Justin Fry rebuilding the O-line, with Tony Alford coaching now running backs who are very good out of the backfield at catching and moving the ball through the air, too. So I'm just going to get into, first of all, some general stats, then we'll get into some more interesting ones, and then I'm going to talk about more so why I think he'll win the Heisman, talk about some rough, very rough, take them lightly, 2022 season projections. In 2021, Stroud passed for 4,435 yards, which was fifth in the nation, behind guys like Bryce Young, for example, and Bailey Zapp. Bryce Young passed for 4,872 yards. He was second in the nation. Stroud completed 72% of his passes, which was third in the nation. He threw for 44 passing touchdowns, which was also third in the nation. Those 44 passing touchdowns are once again behind Bailey Zapp, who is gone off to the NFL, and also behind Bryce Young, who threw for just 47 despite playing in 15 games, whereas Stroud played in 12. He had 6 interceptions, which was tied for 27th. Cade McNamara also with 6 interceptions, so they're tied in basically that one statistic and that alone. 10.1 yards per attempt, which was second in the nation, and a 186.6 passer rating, which was second in the nation behind Grayson McCall, who is deadly efficient at getting the ball out and getting the ball where it needs to be. Stroud's ball placement, his position, his footwork, everything screams QB number 1 or QB number 2 in the NFL draft. And the general stats on paper are, in my opinion, just absolutely impressive. You look at his transformation from September to October, November, and the bowl game, he became a completely different QB, from a guy who was a little scared, a guy who didn't exactly know what he was doing all the time. He's starting QB at Ohio State, so even in his earlier struggling games, he was still a good QB nationally, but he showed signs of struggling, looked like he might have been just a system guy being carried by his great wide receiver core. But the games against Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, and even though, again, he struggled somewhat against Penn State and Nebraska, it still proved that he changed. He improved. That resting week versus Akron might have been the difference between Ohio State possibly losing another game versus Nebraska versus Penn State or something, and them doing what they did. I mean, he really did change. And his 2021 general stats don't even tell you the whole story, because a lot of the guys in front of him played more games than he did. You just look at the stats, and he's impressive. He's elite, but you break down the game-by-game stats, and I think he's more statistically impressive than, let's just say, Bryce Young. Bryce Young only passed for 400-odd-so yards more. He threw 3 more TDs, 1 more interception, all in 3 more games. All in 3 more games. And he had an 87.6 QB rating, which was 4 points behind Stroud's 91.6 QB rating. Also safe to say that CJ Stroud is a year younger than Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud is also 3 inches taller, weighs 10 pounds more. So I look at these two. I think they're both very elite QBs, and I'm using the Bryce Young comparison because it's the most accurate. It's the best comparison. Both were in New York for the Heisman ceremony last season. And I think Bryce Young that year deserved to win it because of what he did to a generationally talented Georgia defense. If not for Jameson Williams going down in that national title game, I almost would love to say the result of that game. And by love, I don't mean I'm rooting for the Tide, but just from a point of being correct or being right or seeing a different outcome, an alternate history, I can certainly say, or near certainly say, that if Jameson Williams doesn't go down, I guarantee you that Alabama would win that football game. Having a great quarterback, great wide receivers is so critical, which is why Bryce Young, without his two best wide receivers, ultimately only had a 114 passer rating against the Georgia Bulldogs, along with throwing only one touchdown and 2 interceptions, in which he previously threw for 3 touchdowns against Georgia in the SEC championship game. So we were just talking about general stats. I think the more specific stats put it better. The yards per game, the points responsible for, the TDs per game. 369.58 passing yards per game. He was behind Bailey Zapp and I think Will Rogers were the two he was behind. I know for sure Bailey Zappi, just because he passed for nearly 6,000 yards in 14 games, which is crazy. It's a record that is going to be very hard to break. I think it's possible to be broken, but it's an impressive record nonetheless. Stroud threw for more yards per game than Bryce Young did, for example. He threw 3.7 passing touchdowns per game, which was, again, more than Bryce Young did. He only played in 12 games. Bryce Young played in 15. He had 264 points responsible for, which was 5th. And if you break that down into points responsible for per game, just like the passing TDs per game exactly, then he would be higher in that statistic too. 264 points responsible for just puts in perspective how much this guy, how much of the offense he is, along with his wide receivers. Score after score after score. I saw in a post by PFF Sports that CJ Stroud since 2014 is the QB with the second most deep ball touchdowns, behind Justin Fields and I think his 2019 season, maybe 2020, and ahead of Dwayne Haskins in his 2018 season. So this guy knows how to throw the deep ball too. He had that 91.6 quarterback rating according to ESPN, which is different than a passer rating. It's measured differently. I don't know exactly how, but it's more of a specific stat that not everyone looks at. So I just wanted to put it in perspective that a company that analyzes sports and knows what they're doing has Stroud ranked first in an efficiency metric, which I think is critical. I think it's the better metric, at least when comparing Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Actually, both in passer rating and quarterback rating, Stroud is listed as better than Bryce Young. But like I said in my Heisman video, efficiency metrics aren't all that matters. In fact, raw statistics matter a lot more to the Heisman committee. Stroud had 7 games with 200-plus passer ratings. Those games were Utah, Michigan State, Purdue. All those 3 were ranked opponents. Indiana, Maryland, Rutgers, and Minnesota. And he had only 3 games where he had under a 150 passer rating. Those were Nebraska, Penn State, and Tulsa. He had a 150-plus passer rating against 2 extra opponents, against Michigan and Oregon, both teams who finished ranked. Michigan went to the playoff. Oregon finished 10-4, barely inside the top 25, but nonetheless a team that beat the Buckeyes, and when they were healthier, were certainly a better team than they were at year's end, when they were confused without a coach in Mario Cristobal, who looked distracted at year's end, and you get the deal. Stroud is also a winner. Not only is he 10-2 as a starting QB, he's 4-2 versus top 25 opponents. Losses to Oregon, losses to Michigan, but wins against Utah, which was a comeback victory too, shows that he does have mental toughness and doesn't give up. A win versus a top 10 Michigan State team, which again, huge mismatch. It's still a top 10 win nonetheless. Top 20 Purdue, they were ranked 19 at the time that CJ Stroud beat them 59-31. Win over Penn State, who always plays Ohio State close. Penn State was ranked 20th that night. This guy can beat top 25 opponents. And those two losses, for the most part, weren't even his fault. The Oregon, the Michigan game, could he have played better at points? Yes. More so the Oregon game than the Michigan game, as he didn't throw a single pick. He nearly did versus Michigan, but at the end of the day, he didn't. He still threw for nearly 400 yards in the Michigan game, nearly 500 in the Oregon game, and was a combined 5 of 1 touchdowns to interceptions in those two games. The defense was the main reason he lost those two games, not CJ Stroud. And if the offense did play a part, it was the play calling, like running 3 times up the middle in your first drive versus Michigan. I was watching that game live as a Michigan fan, and I'm thinking in my head, what are you doing? You're asking to punt the ball to a Michigan team who was able to move the ball pretty effectively via the ground and the air versus Ohio State in the first half. Play calling at points limited Stroud, but Ryan Day is a genius play caller. Stuff happens to everyone, especially when something unexpected hits them, even when they are a genius like Ryan Day. The defense was the main reason he lost those two games. That 7 games with 200-plus passer rating is just, it's phenomenal. It's utterly phenomenal. That's all I can say. Nearly 4 passing touchdowns per game is crazy too, and the one guy that was ahead of him is gone. Bailey Zappi, again, off to the NFL. He's gone. So among active QBs, that puts Stroud first in that statistic. Yes, he loses wide receivers. He loses wide receivers Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. Their names were on the tip of my tongue for just a second there. He loses them along with very underrated tight end Jeremy Ruckert and some offensive linemen like Nicholas Petit-Frere, for example. But he returns the majority of his offensive line. He returns leading wide receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba. And I mean, if you watch the Rose Bowl game, you just know that it's plug in, plug out. When Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson left, and I know Utah's secondary isn't the greatest, but it's better than Michigan State's. It's actually much better than Michigan State's was. Stroud still threw for nearly 600 yards, and when he was uncomfortable throwing to the other guys, he just threw it on point to Jackson Smith-Njigba, and more often than not, that resulted in a touchdown. So, he's my 2022 Heisman as a result, and this is my 2022 raw projection. There's a lot of boldness here, but I will remind you, if you look at this, you see the 6,000 passing yards, which does indicate that he breaks that record. I'm going to name a few more stats to make this claim, which I might change in the future. I'm going to make a video discussing Big Ten quarterbacks, and I might have my projections listed for all of them here. I'm going to tweak how I brought these numbers up as well to make it more accurate. It might be subject to change, but it's very possible. Ohio State was 21st in the nation when it came to pass-heavy offenses. They passed 54.8% of the time, which was 21st in the nation. For example, Mississippi State passed for 73% of the time. In their last 3 games, though, Ohio State passed for 61% of the time. Yes, this includes Utah. This includes Michigan State, where if you're going to beat them, you got to pass against them. But it also includes Michigan, too. And when Ohio State's run game gets shut down, and even when it doesn't get shut down, Trevion Henderson still did well against Michigan State, and he did okay against Utah and okay against Michigan. Ohio State just wants to air it out and pass the ball when they can. In the last 3 games of the season, Ohio State passed for 61% of the time, which was in the top 10 nationally. I'm getting this from teamrankings.com, college football statistics. So this is possible, assuming Ohio State plays a 15-game schedule, assuming their offense looks more like it did in the month of November, in the months of October, November, and the bowl game instead of September. That September slowdown, the Tulsa game, him sitting out the Akron game, Ohio State missing the Big Ten championship game, that really hurt his Heisman chances last year. It slowed down his raw statistics. It didn't slow down his efficiency metrics because efficiency doesn't count how many games you play in. It just counts how efficient you are in the games you play in. It doesn't discount you for missing a game or two like the Heisman does. Assuming Stroud starts every game, plays 15 games, these are the statistics that I have. And this may sound impossible. The passing yards is going to be the hardest thing for him to do. But just looking at how Ohio State's offense functioned, this is very doable. And Joe Burrow passed for more TDs, 60 of them, had less interceptions, 6 of them, and had an over 200 passer rating. Mac Jones had an over 200 passer rating. So I'm not saying this guy is the greatest college QB of all time. Let alone, you're also counting into the fact that Joe Burrow, he scrambled. He had a few hundred yards scrambling on the ground. CJ Stroud, even behind that good O-line, even when he has the ability to scramble and escape, is more of the guy who just wants to sit in there for a little longer than, let's say, a Joe Burrow would, and he wants to throw that football because he has the wide receiver talent like Joe Burrow did at LSU. He has the wide receiver talent to do that. And I think he will again this year as he had it last year. It might be a little less talented, but I think with Jackson Smith and Jigba being there, what you saw in the bowl game with Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka, with Julian Fleming being a 5-star backup, just a 5-star backup speaks to the volume of depth that Ohio State has at the wide receiver position. I think that Stroud is primed for a huge year. And as a result of having a huge year, even if he doesn't have these stats, I still think he will win the Heisman and at least get close to achieving these statistics. He won't have that 3-game slump like he did earlier in the year. Plus, with Ohio State having a better offensive line too, give him more time in the pocket, more time to throw. That could also open up more opportunities to run the football more because of the better run block. But I think that, again, pass-heavy offense, the way Ohio State's offense looked later in the year, I think Ohio State's going to continue to move to the direction that Ryan Day wants to make this team, which is a NFL QB development factory, and not an air raid team by any means, but a team that likes to pass the football, and like how most Big Ten teams want to run the ball down your throat, Ohio State wants to dice you up through the air like Gordon Ramsay does in Onion. And that's all I have to say for this video. If you like this video, if you agree with my statistics, evidence, projections, opinions about why I think CJ Stroud is the best QB nationally and why I think he's going to win the Heisman, comment your thoughts on this video down below. I'm going to be doing more of these videos for guys who I think are the best in the nation. Probably going to try and do this for, let's say, Deuce Vaughn from Kansas State, who I think is the #1 running back. I'll do this for a lot of Big Ten players as well. And as the season gets closer and closer, I'm going to release all Big Ten teams, potentially an All-American team video, and start talking more and more about players as we get closer and closer to the season, along with teams still, the regular stuff, of course. But this is kind of a new thing that I'm a huge fan of, very passionate about, because I like talking about elite, great, and underrated players. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys around, and in the comments below, I will notify you of the 2 award winners, as I did do a giveaway this past video. The award winners are randomly selected. 2 of them, both getting $75 gift cards. They will be announced after I get off of work today in a post in my community section and in the comment section below. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. Bye.